Okay, hello, Dragon Stallion folks. Guest CJ Bauer. CJ is a cybersecurity expert. There's a whole host of things that we'll be talking about today relevant to that. Welcome, CJ.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad I could be here.
So, a bit of an overview. This is part of a series that CJ and his partner, uh, Jessica, and I have talked about the whole issue of the advantages and disadvantages of the web, artificial intelligence, and where that may lead us. Uh, as we look at the adoptions of technology, it's apparent if you look at history and you look at things such as the wheel, the spindle, uh, the steam engine, uh, airplanes, and automobiles. With each major iteration of advances, it seems like the time between initiation and adoption gets increasingly shorter. A bit of something like Moore's law, I guess, in terms of the evolution of technology. Uh, and this has come into focus recently with the explosion of artificial intelligence with which we interact on a virtually daily basis. Unfortunately, that can be used for both good and evil. Uh, Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about how to protect against the evil part of it. I am aware that there are forces out there that target older people, younger people, exploit them financially. Uh, Often the hooks may be sexual invitations and so on that can ultimately lead to extraordinary tragedy. And I'd like to get your input, CJ, on how we should be able to determine what is safe and unsafe as we're involved on the web, and how do we protect against those unsafe elements?
Definitely. It is becoming an increasingly more difficult problem for, I guess I would say, lay people, people who are not super involved in tech. Although with AI, even people who are super involved in tech, just because there's so much to know and so much to keep track of. And what AI does is really just, I like to say, Google's faster with more energy because at its core, AI isn't doing anything that hasn't been done before. It can just do it faster and it can do it automatically. And so, in the case of AI that's used to try to prey on people, that's usually using what we call like a large language model. And that will, have access to billions of words and phrases and just all the text data and spoken word data on the internet feasibly. And it can search through all of that so quickly and then use statistics to know what it's most likely to say next. So if you ask a question, it can ask the entire internet instantly what all the answers to a question like that have ever been and give you a response that makes sense. And so an old school phishing email might be full of typos and kind of be obviously fake because it's just poorly worded and doesn't make sense. But an AI would be able to put together a fake email with perfect grammar and with responses that are sensible and that seem perfectly human. And so it's much more difficult to know the difference now, just based on a glance. You have to look much deeper in order to know whether or not something is real or fake. And it's kind of reached a point where, on a technical level, you almost can't. If you're just looking at an email, say, or you're even talking on the phone, because now AI can imitate voices, especially of public figures. So we've reached this point where our humanness is the unique element that gives us the advantage we need. We need to not read something and go, oh, well, this is so well put together, yeah, it's very convincing. Instead, you have to go, well, is this thing I'm reading sensible? Like, does this make, if it was a person saying this to me, would I be convinced? Was what they're saying sound like a good idea? And it may actually be a person, it may be an AI composing that sentence. At this point, the difference between the two is so hard to notice in terms of how an email is composed or how a sentence is spoken, that now you're back to just talking to a person and going, that doesn't make any sense. What this person is saying is ridiculous. Or if someone is speaking to you and making sense and you're, trying to use good judgment and critical thinking to determine if you agree with them or not, um, you now have to use those same tools to kind of navigate a world where AI exists. It's possible to see, for instance, deep fakes. Deep fakes are AI's ability to create videos that aren't real, but that look perfectly realistic of, for instance, a public figure giving a speech they never made, saying things that they never said. And that makes it very easy to, I saw one of Obama wearing like a black suit in this like ominous room with red stuff behind him, making very fascist sounding statements. And agree or disagree with Obama, that particular speech never happened. That was a proven fake video, but it looked perfectly real. So at that point, you can't trust that, it looks like Obama, it sounds like Obama, it seems like a perfectly real event, even though it wasn't. You have to look at it and say, does it make sense that this would happen? Does it make sense that I'm only seeing this on some obscure YouTube video? Why wouldn't it be all over the news if it happened? Why wouldn't other people be telling me about it if it had happened? We've reached a point where AI makes things so much more human-like that we really just have to treat it like I was just talking to a person if I saw a video or read an email.
As we explore this, it appears like we're heading into the silly season right now as we get into more heated political discussions. We're more and more likely to get trolled by parties that are interested in persuading us to one position or another. And we will be seeing a variety of fake videos, fake inputs that may be distortions.
Absolutely, yeah. And that can seem really intimidating.
How do we distinguish fair from foul, though?
A lot of the old school advice on, again, as a cybersecurity analyst, I think of like a phishing email, right? Trying to convince you to share information, or if you work in finance or something, it'll be like, whoa, super urgent, please send this money to such and such place right away. It's an emergency, and it's fake. But the way an AI-based thing trying to convince you wouldn't work like that, because the tells would be less obvious. So um, at this point, I kind of think of it like it's all just sales, because whether it's just someone trying to convince you of their political opinion in a perfectly non-malicious way, they just think something's important, they're trying to convince you of their point of view, or if it's someone who's entirely malicious trying to deceive you, they're kind of doing the same thing. It's someone trying to sell you a car. You may or may not need a car, and that may or may not be a good car, but the car salesman just wants to sell a car, right? This person with a political opinion just wants to convince you to change your mind. This person trying to deceive you just wants you to wire some money. And they're all just trying to sell you or change your behavior in some way that benefits them. And so if you think of every interaction as whether or not this lines up with my values, whether or not this lines up with something I would want to do, then whether it's a person or an AI or some combination of the two, you can hopefully kind of keep yourself balanced on a track where the choices you make and the things that you do and don't pay attention to and engage with align with your values, so that um, positive AI content enriches you and then negative AI content doesn't. But at this point, the line between man and machine and all of that is so blurry, because AI is so realistic, that I would almost advise people not to try to identify AI, because it's really, really hard to do until we have kind of better counter tools to flag and say, hey, this video is a deep fake, this isn't real, because it's so hard to tell without training or tools. So
Are there certain browsers or search engines that are more or less reliable? And assuming that we are using a browser, are there ways to make that more secure?
I'm gonna hedge a disclaimer here. I'm something of a privacy nut, and on a personal level, I disagree strongly with, for instance, Google's practice of collecting so much data about people um, over the course of using their products and services, and then having that information about you to generate better targeted advertising and predictive ads and so on. But I do think that that's something of a separate issue from personal security. So I'll try to leave the privacy part out unless it's something we want to explore. But in terms of security against explicit malicious actors with whom you have not chosen to do business or with whom you've not chosen to engage, there are definitely some browsers that are more inclined to keeping your data safe. And I would lean towards things like Firefox or Brave browser. And they do a slightly different thing that can make a big difference, which is where they just don't try to track you. They, by default, leave things like cookies off, and they'll leave tracking protection on automatically. So instead of your browser defaulting to, why yes, save all the cookies, why yes, track my location, why yes, save all of my stuff, that's all convenience oriented. And the problem there is that means all that information is available for other people to use. If you have all of those things turned off by default, it's less convenient for you as a user because you won't see ads for things that are specific to you, right? And some people want to. If you're running a search for something and you have your location services disabled and you just look up restaurants near me, well, it's not going to use your location. It's going to use the location of like, probably your internet service provider. And so you may say restaurants near me and get restaurants in some other city. And then you have to go back and specify restaurants near, Reno, Nevada or whatever. And that's slightly inconvenient, but that means that information about you is not automatically available. And so what is a VPN? That's a fascinating question that totally ties into this. VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, and for the purposes of again, like non-technical people, try to make this as relatable as possible to everyone. You can think of it as a secret tunnel across the internet. So a lot of people who work remotely are familiar with VPNs because they know it's a thing on their computer that they have to have on and connected so that they can be on the corporate network. Because normally, if you want to be on the corporate network, you have to be at the corporate network physically and plugged into a port in the wall or on your corporation's Wi-Fi network to be in the same place in terms of the network as the stuff you need to connect to, as the servers and databases that you need to pull information from. A VPN is a bit of like networking magic that makes it so that you could be, on the other side of the world, but it creates a connection from the other side of the world to your job or your home or really to anything you want. And that connection is secured so that your traffic going across it isn't open and available to everything it touches along the way. Because the internet stands for interconnected networks. And so as you reach across the internet to go anywhere, your connection makes a bunch of stops. It'll go to your ISP, which is like Charter or AT&T, and T, and then through their network and a bunch of routers, and then maybe to, what we call a content delivery network where a bunch of stuff is saved and then out to somewhere else and back. It makes all these stops. And feasibly at every single one of those stops, someone could look at your traffic because it's passing through their equipment to get where it's going. A VPN keeps it secret and makes it so that you're connected to something directly as if you're right there with them that you wouldn't otherwise be connected to.
I like the idea of VPNs. One of the problems I've had personally is that when I use one, it's often difficult to get into legitimate password protected sites. Why is that?
That is because, like most of the technology we've discussed, the technology is what I would say ethically neutral. AI can be used for good or for evil, and VPNs can be used for good or for evil. I, as a citizen concerned about my own privacy, use a VPN as often as possible because I only want people that I'm choosing to do business with to have any information about me, and everything else about it should be just invisible or gibberish to anyone else who I have not chosen to engage with. But if I were a hacker, obviously I don't want people to know who I am, where I'm connecting from, because I'm doing something malicious. I'm trying to break in and steal things. I'm trying to deceive people. I'm trying to commit crime. And
But CJ, I know about a legitimate site. Why is it that we have such difficulty logging into those sites using a VPN?
because as far as the site knows, you could be anyone. The VPN makes you anonymous. So you could be a perfectly legitimate person wanting to use that site for legitimate reasons, or you could be a hacker trying to break into that site and compromise it, and the site can't tell the difference. The site just knows.
What's the workaround then?
So, unfortunately, some of those sites you just have to disable your VPN for. If you have to get into that site, there's no different site you can use, and that site has chosen not to trust VPN connections because they could be malicious, then you'll just have to disable your VPN for that site, which I share your frustration with that because as a legitimate VPN user, I'm like, no, this is my security online. This is me keeping myself safe. You're telling me I can't keep myself safe and still use your services. That's not fair. But that's the state that we're in currently, where bad actors also use VPNs for bad reasons. And the site doesn't know the difference because you're anonymous. You're a connection from a VPN, and that's all it knows. And so it has no way of determining if you're good or evil or what. So it just says not trusting it. You have to identify yourself if you want to come in. You have to have an open connection.
What is the merit of browsing the web using an incognito mode?
Actually, that's I would say the merits are fairly minimal because
It's not really incognito.
it's absolutely not. Yeah. What an incognito window does is really only on your local computer. So if you, for instance, if you browse to a site that has a username and a password and you save your username and password for later, right? Like keep me signed in checkbox, then you're just saving what's called a cookie in your browser, which is like it's literally just like a VIP pass, right? If you go to a club or something and they stamp your hand, you don't have to wait in line, like do the whole thing over again. You can just show the stamp and they go, cool, you're good, and they let you right in, right? Your cookie is the same thing. An incognito window doesn't save those cookies, and that's it. It's the cookie is saved on your browser, on your computer, and that's for your convenience. And when you go to a site, websites can see your cookies because that's how they remember who you are. That's how they remember, what items you had saved in your cart on a shopping website. That's all cookies and their data they remember. On an incognito window, your browser just doesn't save any of that. So if you go back to the same sites again, none of that information is available, and it's as if you were there from scratch. But when you visit, you're still you going there doing things. So if the site saves anything on their side, the fact that you used an incognito window means nothing to them. It just means that you didn't save any information in your browser. So that's great if you don't want your browser history saved for wherever you go, and the place that everyone's minds went for that is probably accurate, right? Any reason you wouldn't want your browser history saved. And it's good for same with work. Usually at work, you sign into your browser and you'll sign into your work email. And a lot of times that automatically signs you into 10 other things that all have to do with your work email. If there's an 11th thing that has nothing to do with your work email and you want to sign into that with a different username and password, your incognito window is useful for that because it's not going to try to sign you in with your work email. But in terms of keeping you safe online, not really. It's not what it's for.
So let me run through several situations that I think I'd like to alert our audience to. Suppose I'm the parent of a 14-year-old girl who aspires to be an actress and a dancer and a model, and she gets on the web. What kind of hazards does that present?
So many hazards. So the internet that, for instance, that I grew up with was kind of like the wild, wild west, right? There were just all these different websites from all different people all over the place. And some were bad for sure, but the vast majority of them were just, someone was into Dungeons and Dragons, so they made a Dungeons and Dragons website, or someone wanted to discuss science and engineering, so they made a forum for science and engineering, and you went there to talk about it. And most of the internet was stuff like that. Now the internet is hyper centralized, hyper corporate, and streamlined, and everything is supercharged to get money and attention and get all those things done. And people can ride the wave of this supercharged engine to accomplish whatever they set out to accomplish. It happens really fast with a lot of like power that you can just spend money on to power whatever it is you're trying to do. And so it's really, really easy to get connected to something and then get sucked into it really fast and really hard before you have a chance to really assess what's going on. And with kids in particular who are super impressionable and who just, haven't developed fully good judgment yet, it's easy for them to see something that's bad, not realize that it's bad, and then in a very short period of time get incredibly involved with it to the point where, I mean, they're suffering like addiction to this thing, especially with social media. And it's very, very hard for them to let go. And it happens so fast that it's such an evolving culture that parents might look at it and like not even understand the jargon or how they made it to this site or who any of these people are. And so once they're in, it's very hard to get them out. So I would strongly advise parents to severely limit how much you allow kids unfettered access to the internet. Um,
I think that's an imperative, and I think and it shouldn't be too harsh. I think it really requires an open, awareness focused dialogue with the child to say, these are the hazards that are out there. And it's no longer a stranger on a schoolyard offering you candy. Uh, it's much more than that. So, that's one issue, and I think we have to be careful, extremely careful with our kids about that. So it means that the parent and child need to have regular, trusting dialogue, and the child needs to be able to appreciate that the parent may have certain biases, but the parent should be perceived as somebody who's a reasonable and wise filter. Let's go to another example. Suppose I get an email from my lovely daughter who asked me, "Hey, Dad, click on this site." Should I click on that site?
um, so not until after you've done some checks. I thought of this exact example before we started the episode, so I'm glad you brought this up. Going back to like the VPN question, going back to AI and malicious actors making things to try to trick you, this is absolutely one of the ways that it's like the most common way they try to do it, right? Phishing emails and just ways of tricking you because humans are the weak link. Computers do exactly what they're told. So worst case scenario there is you give it bad instructions and you get a bad outcome, right? But humans are squishy and we get tired and confused and we want stuff, and so we're easy to play tricks on. This is the number one thing that most people have to look out for is fake text, fake emails, fake prompts online, stuff on social media that's trying to convince you and it's actually bad because literally anyone can click some buttons and make one of these. There are tools out there that make malicious phishing emails for you to send out. You don't even have to know what you're doing, and you can just make an evil email and send it to 10,000 people. So this is like the number one risk. For an average user, if you get that email, hey dad, check out this video, it's super funny, you'll love it. There's a couple things you can do before you click. Inside of an email up at the top where it says who it's from, there's almost always a little like drop down arrow or the email that it's from is a link and you can hold your mouse over it. You want to open that up because in an email, there's what we call the header from, and that's like the name, right? From so and so. But then just like if you send a letter in the mail, there's from so and so, and underneath that, there's like their return address and more information about them. In an email, we also have what's called the envelope sender, and that's like the actual email address that it came from, not the name that they put on it. So it could say, I'm your daughter, but then you open it up and it says it's from 07651 blah 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 at randomdomain.com, and you're like, that's not her email address. Instantly ignore it, delete that email, right?
But there's a possibility that her own email had been hacked to a degree that it could come from her email address.
That is absolutely true. Yep. Um, so if you're anytime you're unsure, I caution everyone to like default to a channel that you trust to confirm something before you click on a link. Always. It could be someone you do business with. It could be a family member. And like in my case, no one emails me links. That just doesn't happen. If my mom emailed me a link and was like, "Hey, check this out," I'd be like, "Why are you emailing me?" Because that's not like her. But I can text my mom. I can call my mom and say, "Hey, did you email me this link?" "Okay, cool. I just wanted to check." And if she did, great. But
That's exactly the kind of dialogue my kids and I have. Did you really send this? And should I click on it? Okay.
Yeah, that check is not hard to do, and I know like teenagers may be like, oh, that's lame. My friends are gonna think that I'm so good. Let them. I know I'm the boring adult who I'm not cool anymore, but like you let your friends think that you're lame because the consequences of your friends going, God, you're so paranoid for like a second, and then you watch the funny video anyway is nothing. But if you click on a malicious link that actually downloads something onto your phone, how many personal photos or text messages with things that you might find embarrassing are on your phone, and if someone could download something and get some of that information, how much more embarrassing would it be for anyone, but like teenagers in the audience, how embarrassing would it be for you if someone could get your text messages that are private between you and your friend or you and your boyfriend or girlfriend and then post them online for everyone to see? And if it's that easy to do, that's terrifying. But your friends being like, why are you so paranoid? That's over in a second. Like, you should absolutely check.
So let's change the age spectrum a bit. I'm now a 65 plus old widow or widower, and I get hooked up on Facebook with somebody who is really a gorgeous potential partner who might be 20 years my junior. What should I do about that?
So, verifying someone's identity on the internet is very difficult. So, if you don't personally know someone on the internet, just always assume you do not know them. They are unverified, they are a stranger until you have met them in person. Because everything, every video call, every phone call, every photo, every single one of those things can be faked. And people who are trying to trick you will fake them in order to trick you. And I had it happen to me as a young guy when I was on dating apps. When I was still single, you would like swipe on a profile and then it would match. And oh, cool, I matched with someone, great. And then you would get talking and they'd seem like they were really excited to meet you. And then they would like turn around and end up trying to like ask you for money or say, oh, I'm from this other country, I need help so I can come visit you. And I'm like, what is, this is another fake one, right? And you can't tell. They seem like normal people. And then as you start to interact, it turns into this, like they ask you for stuff. They're trying to take advantage of you. So just, you don't have to like assume the internet is evil and that everyone's out to get you, because I don't want to encourage people to be paranoid. But you should just assume everyone's a stranger and treat your interactions on the internet the same way that you would treat them if you met a stranger in the real world. If you met someone on the street and they were like, hey, I'm so and so and I do this, do they? They could just say that. So until you have like real physical proof, then, don't give out your banking information and share limited personal information about yourself, no addresses, you could have a fake phone number that's not hard to do, get Google Voice or whatever, have like an anonymity layer between you and the internet. And then if you think that, no, this person seems perfectly real and sincere and I would love to meet them, okay, meet them in a public place with witnesses, just like you would if you were trying to sell a car, right?
On the risk and benefits of artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and anything technical. CJ has some distinct advantages in that he's at least half my age, if not more. And as a consequence, his youth confers on him extraordinary flexibility, plus years of wasting his adolescence in video games has allowed him to be incredibly talented at things such as negotiating issues such as cybersecurity. Uh, we were just talking about vulnerable populations at the extremes, and I just wanted to hit with you some of the common illustrations where I've seen people exploited on the web. Lonely people get exploited simply because they need attachments. And the cruelty of that is extraordinary. People take advantage of that, sometimes hurting people's feelings, sometimes to the point of putting people to the point of suicide. I know of one occasion of an older gentleman that got hooked into a sex site, and ultimately it turned out that the recipient of his attentions, the person who was actually trolling him, was underage. This guy is now serving time. So there are extraordinary dangers with this. There are other issues, such as financial ones. People will be called by representatives from Microsoft, allegedly, or Amazon, telling them that there's something going wrong with their software and they need certain specific information to help them repair the problem, and it needs to be done urgently. The IRS will be calling you, asking for all sorts of information, which usually includes bank accounts and so on. None of these things should be responded to directly. It's probably a good idea if somebody calls you and you think there's a possibility that that person may be legitimate, simply take their phone number and call back and then check out the identity of the person as represented online to see if that correlates with the phone number provided. Never hurts to call an independent resource. Sometimes if you're being called by a vendor that many of us deal with, for example, Amazon, you might simply call Amazon and say, "Are you calling me about something?" To verify that they indeed are trying to track you. But these are all issues I think that we need to be vigilant about. Next time, what I'd like to do, if you can, CJ, is actually to join you and perhaps invite Jess into the dialogue to talk about the whole positive uses of the internet, the web, ways to expand our horizons.
Yeah, absolutely. Because caution matters. There obviously are, bad things that can happen and negative outcomes that we want to avoid. But at the same time, these tools are powerful and available for all of us. And when used correctly, they really can improve our lives in a lot of powerful ways. So I think knowing how to use them appropriately is the key, both to being safe and to enriching ourselves and enriching the lives of people we care about.
CJ, thank you so much for your time. I hope that if there's any of you out there who have questions, you contact us through our email site, which I believe is available now, drtomauthor@gmail.com. Anyway, look forward to hearing from you and wishing you all a happy and safe 4th of July weekend. Do healthy things. Be well. Bye-bye.